for some reason maybe didn't like whatever grade you got last trimester, didn't like what you saw with missing assignments. Sometimes it's hard if you're missing assignments and then to try to get your grade back up. So you're going to want to start from here forward with the right habits. Okay, so make sure you're keeping your things in a good place where you can then turn it in on time and everything, and make sure you're finishing all of your assignments. That's going to start you off in the right place this time. Okay, you have to have all that practice so that when we get to the tests that you know what we're doing. Okay, so make sure you have your notes out because we're going to take some notes too. I know it's been a while since we've done a new lesson because we've been practicing for the proficiency and all of that, but time to start our new lesson. So we have learned about decimals a little bit before. We learned about how to change decimals into fractions. We learned how to read decimals. We learned how to compare decimals. So our lesson today is about rounding decimals. So when you round decimals, it's pretty much like rounding any other number, like a regular number. So once we get started with this, you're going to see that it's not that much different. If you remember the rules of rounding and you remember your place value for decimals, then this lesson shouldn't be very difficult for you. Okay? You got to just remember some things we've learned before. So we're going to use place value and properties to add and subtract decimals. So parts of this, today we're rounding, but we do get into adding and subtracting decimals. Then we get into multiplying and dividing decimals too. So lots of work with decimals to come here for the next couple of weeks. Here's your problem of the day. So I want you to just think really carefully. T-shirts cost $10. Okay, there's one piece of information. $4 of the cost of each shirt will be donated to a charity. So $4 off of every 10 that they sell, they're going to donate to charity. So how many T-shirts have to be sold? Hold on. How many T-shirts must be sold to raise $2,000 for the charity? Remember that our problem of the day is like just kind of a way to get your brain going and thinking about some math things. It's generally something that you can do that we've done before in class or something that you should be familiar with. So think about how many T-shirts have to be sold in order to get $2,000 to donate to their charity. So if you don't have a whiteboard or a whiteboard marker, you can always use your notes. If you have a whiteboard, you can work that out on your whiteboard. I'll give you a minute to think. Then I want you to think with a partner in a moment. Charity gets only $4 from each T-shirt. We can divide that into 2,000. So as I said, I heard people saying, well, how does this go with rounding decimals? The problem of the day is not always about what we're doing that day, because I can't really ask you a question about what we're doing this day because you haven't learned it yet. So usually what we do on problem of the day is something that you've done in a previous chapter or a previous lesson, just to help remind you of something that we've done. We did long division for the last 2 chapters. So the last 2 chapters was long division. So this was a word problem that you had to decide what you were going to do to solve. So problem of the day is usually a little tricky and has some things in there that you have to think about. So I'm going to divide $4 into $2,000. And because 4 doesn't fit into 2, I put the placeholder. 4 fits into 25 times. I'll take the stapler. Thank you. So we have a 5 up here. 5 times 4 is 20. Then we'll bring down these zeros, and we have to keep putting zeros on top because there's not enough. So if you did some mental math here, like this, let me clear this one. If you did this mental math saying $2,000 divided by $4, I'm going to wait till all the voices besides mine stop. You can't fully listen if you're also talking to someone else. It's a little bit, but it's out there. So fully listen all the way before you have any conversations with anyone else. You can do mental math like this. 4 goes into 25 times, and then you take these zeros and you add them on. So, oops, that should not be a $sign. So the charity would have to sell 500 T-shirts in order to raise $2,000. So $2,000 would, to get $2,000 at $4 a T-shirt, they would need to sell 500 T-shirts. All right, let's look at our notebooks. We're going to take some notes. Good. All right, so here's what I want you to write at the top. Chapter 5, lesson 1, and then you can write round decimals. Something I need you to remember, which is if you were to look back into your notes into the first couple of chapters in our math book, you would see some place value charts. So I need you to write one of those just so that we remember our place value. This is the ones place. And then after the decimal, we have tenth, hundredth, and thousandth. I needed longer lines. So 1 space after the decimal is the tenths place, 2 spaces after the decimal is the hundredths place, and 3 spaces after the decimal is the thousandths place. Here's why it's important that you remember that, because on all of these questions, they're going to be asking you to round to a certain place. And if you have your place values mixed up, you'll be rounding, maybe you're rounding correctly, but maybe you're rounding to the wrong digit. Okay, so that's why it's important to remember that. The other thing that I need you to remember that we're going to put a star by is the ones is the same place as the whole number. That's an O. Hamza, what's your question? This is because after the decimal, there's a fraction equivalent to that. So that would be like a tenth. Remember, this is how we would write it when we were practicing last week, and this would be how you would write 100th and 1000th, like that. So it's like a fraction equivalent. So if you go this way on our number line or our place value chart, you would get to tens with an S, not a TH, and then hundreds, and then thousands, and then 10,000s, and then 100,000s. Remember, if you go that direction, your number is getting bigger, and it's whole numbers. If you go this direction after the decimal, your number is actually getting smaller. Right, correct. So, and some of these questions, they're going to ask you to round to the nearest whole number. So if they ask you to do that, that's why we wrote this in here, so that you would remember that the nearest whole number means the ones place. Okay, so anytime you see the nearest whole number, you know that means it's the ones place. So let's try some examples, and we have some steps we're going to write down too. So do you have your place value chart there, right? Because you're going to use that in a second. Here's our first number, 287 and 63 hundredths. So step number 1 is to underline the place that you're rounding to. So step number 1, underline the place that you are rounding to. You guys writing the steps? You need all the steps in your notes. So underline the place that you're rounding to. So far I haven't told you which place we're rounding to yet, but that'll be your step number 1. So if I tell you we're going to round to the tenths place in this number, then what digit will I underline? Amy, what digit will I underline? Hold on, let me say that one more time. The tenths place with the TH. So if I tell you we're rounding to the tenths place, which place will I underline? The 6. Maybe you thought I said tens. So we underline the 6. That's our step number 1. Do you see why it's important that you remember what the tenths place is? Mm-hmm. So you need to have that into your notes. You need to know where the tenths place is at. Step number 2, you look to the right. So you will look to the right of the underlined digit. So in order to show that, we draw a little arrow like that. I'm going to hold your work because I don't want you to start work without doing notes and you haven't written anything down yet. Write down our steps. I'll give this back to you when we're all finished. Want to make sure you hear the whole lesson before you try to start doing the assignment. So then we're going to look to the right. Anybody remember the song? The rounding song. Angelina, do you remember the rounding song? 5 or more, you up the score. 4 or less, you give it a rest. That's what you learned in like 2nd grade, 3rd grade. Whenever, hold on. Whenever you learn to round for the first time, okay, rhyme, song, could be turned into a song, could be a rhyme. You learned that to help you to remember. Gonna wait again for people to stop talking. I know it's the day after Halloween, but I'm having an extremely hard time keeping your attention for this math lesson. I need you to listen and pay attention and write all the notes that I'm writing. So that rhyme goes along with what we're doing today too. That's why I told you you're going to notice that what we're doing is pretty much the same as what you did when you rounded whole numbers. The only difference is the places are different. So when it's telling you to round to the 10th place, you have to know where that place is. So 5 or more, you up the score. 4 or less, you give it a rest. We're going to write that down. We'll start with the 5. The number that's underlined is going to be the end of your number. So once I round it, the number after the underline is going to just disappear. When we were doing whole numbers, all the digits after the underline turned to 0, right? That's what you did. So you look to the right, and then it was 5 or more, up the score. 4 or less, you give it a rest. And then all the numbers after the underline would turn into zeros.
Actually, if it's a decimal, wouldn't you just totally eliminate that?
That's exactly what I just said, but then I was telling you about something else. So listen really, I wasn't finished. You interrupted and I wasn't finished. So after the underline, when you are rounding whole numbers, you turn those to zeros. When you're rounding decimals, you get rid of them, and your number will end where the underline is. Anything after the underline, it will be gone. So if it asks you to round to the 10th place, like I did in this example, that means my number will end at the 10th place when I show my answer. So that's going to be something like a double check for you, to go back and check that you have the number in the right spot. Because remember how I told you sometimes people round to the wrong digit and stuff like that? Right. So you have to make sure that the last number in your answer, is the number that was underlined. It should be that line there. So in this case, because the number that I'm pointing to is a 3, that's 4 or less. So that means that the number that's underlined stays the same and does not change. So then my final answer would be 287 and 6/10. Do you notice how the number 3 in this case disappeared? Ashley, turn and face the screen. So anything after the underline disappears. So we're going to put that as step number 4, which I'm going to put to the side because it doesn't fit on my slide. So
That rhymes too.
So any numbers after the underline digit disappear. If you put a 0 there, like if I wrote a 0 here, which is what you would do if it was a whole number, your number that technically is not incorrect, but it's just not the most efficient way to write it. And like on your math proficiency or your math test, you won't see an answer that looks like that. Like if it's a multiple choice question, you won't see the 0 there. So you have to know that that 0 doesn't need to be there. So if I have it there or I don't, it's equal to the same thing. Because remember when we did comparing, those numbers are equal to each other with that extra 0 on the end. But the more efficient way to write it would be without the 0. And so on your tests and things, you won't see the 0. So your final answer is 287 and 6/10. Sean, your question.
If the number isn't a 3 but a 5, do we have to round the 65 to be 70?
Number after that one.
6 changes to a 7.
And the 5 gets rid of?
Yes. Yes. Correct. All right. Let's do a couple more examples. I have some more examples for you. So here's I'm not finished yet. That was only one example and then all the steps. So now let's do a couple more where you have the steps already written down that you can look through. So step number 1 was to underline the digit that you need to round to. So if I ask you to round to the nearest whole number, what digit would that be?
1.
What digit would that be, Hamza?
6.
What? Look back in your notes. If I say the nearest whole number, it would be the 7. The whole number is the ones place. Remember, didn't you write that next? Look at the star on your notes. Next to the star, you wrote ones is the same as the whole number. So if it says round to the nearest whole number, it means the ones place. Okay, which would be the 7. Then I'm going to look to the right, and so I'm just going to pretty much ignore that decimal point. When you're rounding, you're doing the same thing that you did with a whole number, except the place values are different, and sometimes you're going to have a decimal that belongs somewhere in the middle of that number. But I'm just going to look to the right, and if there's a decimal point there, I'm just going to go right past the decimal point to look at the next digit. Okay, so now that the next number is a 0, the rhyme was 4 or less, you give it a rest, 5 or more, you up the score. So what do I do? Ashley, what do I do?
The 7 stays the same, and the 0, all the ones after the 7 turn to 0s because the 0 can't bump up the 7.
Okay, so the 0 doesn't bump the 7, so it stays as a 7, and everything else after it will disappear.
Whoa! Again?
We okay over there?
I'm good.
Okay, let's continue the rest of our math lesson.
The curtain needs to go to the doctor. What's wrong with it?
Scoot all the way up to your desk. Make sure both feet are on the floor at all times. If that's not a good seat for you, pick another. All right, so because of this 0 here, the 7 stays the same, so I have 67. Now, if I could write that, right? And that would technically be a correct answer. But we really just need to have this, because when there's no digits or all the digits after the decimal are zeros, you don't really need the decimal point.
But there's a 1. Because there's not this one, it's just a 1 number. I understand it's all now.
Are you saying there is a 1?
Yeah.
Do you mean this one right here?
Yeah.
Yes. Everything after the underlined digit disappears. Didn't we say that? So if everything is disappeared, you don't really need the decimal. Right. Now, step number 4 was everything after the underline disappears. Let's try another one. If we were using a number line, I want you to think about a number line. We could draw a number line all the way up to 67, but let's just imagine one because I think you could do it. Since this number goes out to the hundredths place, it's 67 and 100th. It's kind of like $67.01 if you thought about money, right? It'd be $67.01. So if I were rounding that to the nearest whole number, isn't $67.01 closer to $67 than $68? And that's what we're doing here. So think about it like that too. You can think about it as, think about it in your, because sometimes people get so caught up in looking at the digit that's underlined and all that stuff, they don't really use common sense. 67 and 1 cent is definitely closer to 67 than it is to 68. And if we're rounding to the nearest whole number, we're talking about the ones place. So it's either 67 or 68. And if you look at a number line and 67 is way back here and 68 is over here, 6701 is somewhere like that.
No, that's 01.
So, well, if you had, yes. If that's the middle, it's way closer to the 67. So, yes. So that's how I know also. So if you use common sense, that will help you out too. So don't just, think about it for a second too after. Make sure your answer is reasonable, basically. Karnpreet.
It's like saying when someone asks you, how much money do you have? You don't say I have $67.01. You say $67.
Correct. And that's what we use for round. That's what we use rounding for a lot. So when we don't need an exact answer, you round the numbers. Like let's say you're going shopping and you only have $20 and you're trying to buy a bunch of groceries. You want to make sure that you stay underneath the $20 so you can pay for all your stuff. So, right. So maybe you round everything up or something so that you kind of accommodate for the tax or whatever. Okay?
That would be $73.
Okay, let's do another example. Here we go. 4 and 795 thousandths. What happens if we round 4 and 795 thousandths to the hundredths place? Which digit is in the hundredths place? Nolan? Hundredths.
That would be 9.
The 9. So we underline the 9. We look to the right. And since I see a 5 there, what does the rhyme say I do when I see a 5 there? What do I do? 5 or more, you up the score. So the 9 is upped. But what do I do? So if I'm upping the 9, what's the number above a 9?
It would be 40.
A 10.
So then
Watch. See what I'm doing there?
What?
A 10 doesn't fit in one space. So I can't fit a 2-digit number in a 1-digit space. So the 1 in the 10 has to be moved over a space. So you would get 4 and 80 hundredths. But because the 0 is here and we don't really need to keep any zeros after, it would really just be 4 and 8 tenths.
That's what I said.
Now, hold on. If you look at this number right here, look at this as a number. It's 79. What would you change 79 to if you needed to bump it up? You bump it up to 80, right? If you were bumping it up 1. Sometimes people get really confused when there's a 9 and you have to bump it up, and then they don't know what to do with it. You're making it a 10. You're making the 9 a 10, but you have to bump that 1 over too. So it's a really good idea, if you're going to do that, to look at both of these numbers together as 79 so that you know that you're going to bump it up to 80. Then I was able to get, because remember everything else after the underline, this was the digit that was underlined in the hundredths place. So everything after that would disappear. And also the 0 would disappear too, because we don't need a 0 if it's at the end of the number. If the number looked like this, can we get rid of the 0?
Yeah. No, you can't.
Why can we not get rid of that 0? Karmpreet, you were saying it. Because there's an 8 after it. And we can't get rid of anything if there's another digit after it that's a non-zero number.
4 tenths.
So don't get confused. You can't take off every 0 after the decimal point, but you can take if it's at the very end of the number. Okay, because it means that there's 0. Basically what this was meaning is that there's 0 hundredths. So the little hundredths blocks, there's 0 of them. So you don't really need to show it. You know? But if this digit, this means that you have to keep this one because there's some after it. Okay, because now there's 8 hundredths and you have to keep that 0 tenths. All right, let's do one more. Round to the nearest whole number. So what does the whole number mean? Angelina, what's the whole number? Right, the whole number is the 9 because it's in the ones place. Perfect answer. So now I'm going to look to the right. That's my step number 2. Step number 3, 4 or less, give it a rest. 5 or more, you up the score. So because it's a 0, what do I do? Nolan, what do I do?
You just change it into 39.
So it would be 39 and then everything after the decimal disappears. So now it's just 39. Some people like to do this. You don't need the decimal either. Because if you don't have any digits after it, you don't need to have the decimal point there. So you just leave the decimal point off. As I told you before, putting 39.00, technically not an incorrect answer, but I need you to get in the habit of writing it without those zeros. Listen carefully, stop interrupting. Just listen. If I need anybody's help in explaining something, I'll ask you to help me. Because otherwise, you're talking and I'm talking and we're saying kind of 2 different things, but the same thing. Just let me finish. I need you to know that on a test, you won't see with the decimal 00 unless we're talking about money. If they said that he took $39.01 to the store to spend, how much money did he have rounded to the nearest dollar? Then you could say $39 with the decimal 00. and obviously the dollar sign at the front. So if the question had a dollar sign, then your answer could, and you could put that because we're talking about money. But if you don't have that talking about money, then you would want to leave those decimal, the numbers after the decimal, the zeros after the decimal. You'd want to leave those off. Nolan.
I got a question.
Okay.
Why is it only with money that they put the zeros?
Just because, well, that's just the unit that we use when we talk about money. So when we talk about money, we go up to the hundredths place. And so if they're talking about money, you'd want to show that. You know, like when you go to a store and you look at a price tag on something, it always tells you 0.00, even if it's mostly, not always, but a lot of times. Yeah, it depends on the store you go to, I guess.
Yeah.
I guess.
$2.99.
I need the girls at the yoga balls to stop their conversations.
99 and 25.
Pay attention to the math notes the whole time. Even if you feel like it doesn't apply to you, it does. I'm talking to everybody. Even the people in the back corners. Today, the people in the corners feel like that nobody can see them. I can see you everywhere. Pay attention. In your notes, I want you to solve this one. Round 674 and 649 thousandths to the nearest 10.
10. Jeez, like that.
Write the number.
It's right there.
Write the number, and then round it.
6.
There we go. All right, what number's in the tens place? What number's in the tens place, Malachi? Hold on, that's the tenths, TH. This one's asking for 10. Just the 10. So what number do you think it would be? This is the ones place. This is the tens place. That number, this and this are different. Do you see the difference between those two? This number is 10, which is before the decimal point. This is like your old, if without these other numbers here, the 649 at the end. That's what you already knew about place value from a long time ago. Ones, tens, hundreds. This number did not say tenth. It said 10. So the tens place is the 7. We look to the right. What happens to the 7? Angelina?
The 7 stays there because it's higher than the 4.
Yep. So 6 stays the same. So anything before, you needed to know this part too. Anything before the underline stays the same, right? Then the number that's underlined is the only number that could change. In this case, it's going to be stay at 7. Then the 4 is going to change to a 0. And everything after the decimal is just going to disappear because we don't need all of that. So then our final answer is 670. So in this case, you had all those decimals at the end, all those digits in the decimal places, but you didn't even really need to use them because we rounded to the tens place. All right, look at your first example on your page. Andrew's laptop has a processor with a speed of 2 8/10 gigahertz. Round the processing speed to the nearest whole number. So what is the nearest whole number in this number? I'm going to get some people who haven't answered a question for me yet. So which number, you have a 50-50 chance this has 2 digits in it. So which of these digits would be the nearest whole number, Ava? The 2. So on our example here, they have a number line. So the number line is between 2 and 3. So 2 and 1/10 would be here, 2 and 2/10, 2 and 3/10, 2 and 4/10, 5/10, 6, 7, 8, 9. And then when you get to 2 and 10/10, it's really 3, which is the next number. So if I wanted to look at 2 and 8/10, it would be way over here. Fill in the number line, please. Make sure you fill in the number line. And then put a little arrow. Everybody should be filling in the number line. So is 2 and 8/10 closer to the 2 or closer to the 3?
Like,
Closer to 3, right? So you would round it to 3. This is one way of solving these problems. So one way is if they show you a number line, you should be able to look at the number line and decide which number it's closest to, especially if it's whole numbers. So when they're asking you to round to the nearest whole number, that means without the decimal points. The other way to do that would be round to the nearest whole number. You would underline the 2. You would look to the right. And since it's 5 or more, you up the score, so the 2 changes to a 3. And then anything after the 3 disappears because it's after the decimal point. So then your final answer is 3. So I wanted to show you that you can get the same answer either way. When you look through the assignment today, you're going to see some that ask you to use a number line. They probably will have drawn the number line for you there because they do that a lot and let you kind of fill it in the way we just did it here. That's why I wanted to make sure everybody had it filled in there as their example. Sean.
I actually have a question.
Hold on, Sean. Hold your question. I want to make sure people over here stop tapping and people over here stop talking so that they could all hear your question. It's important that everybody listens to everybody else when they're speaking. So go ahead, Sean. Tell us your question again.
Okay. So basically, when it says round to the nearest 1, does it mean the one after the decimal or the one before the decimal? Is there ones or ones?
No. Look back at your notes at the beginning where we wrote a place value chart. Tenths is the first digit after the decimal point. They're not going to say round to the ones place. They'll tell you to round to the nearest whole number, which is why we also wrote that in our notes. So when it says nearest whole number, it means the ones place. Yeah.
What he was looking at, it says round to the nearest 10th.
10th with a TH, then that would be the first place after the decimal. That's what you wrote when we drew our place value chart.
Like how many zeros would be there? Like I said,
1 0 for the tenths place, 2 for the hundredths. Is that what you mean?
well, not exactly. You know how 10? I can wait. 10?
If you work ahead, sometimes you don't get everything that we've done because you don't get to hear everything. That's why you get confused. So example number 2 is to round 46 and 73 hundredths to the nearest tenth. Here's the tenths place. If we look to the right, which is what we're doing here, the underlined, the tenths place would be the 7. When we look to the right, 3 is less than 5. Remember, 4 or less, you give it a rest. So you're going to keep the underlined digit the same, and you're going to drop the digits to the right. So then 46 and 73 hundredths just rounds to 46 and 7 tenths. Remember what I said at the beginning. The number that it asks you to round to should be the final number in your answer. So it asked us to round to the tenths place, so the final number in our answer should be 10th.
Pretty, and now please just answer it.
Okay, the final, the number was 46.
All the other numbers go back.
So round to 3, the 3 doesn't go in anything, so it becomes a 0, then you pick off the 0 and then...
Hear that? Okay, question answered. Guided practice.
John didn't really read the whole thing.
Actually, I did.
Okay, so it says round 8 and 74 hundredths to the nearest 1. Underline the digit in the ones place. This is guided practice, so it's walking you through step by step. So what is the number in the ones place, Sean?
The number in the ones place is the 4.
It's the 8.
The number in the ones place is the first number that's to the left of the decimal point.
Unless it has 10.
It says to the left, it says to the right of the 8.
That number right there. Yeah, that's the ones.
It says look at the...
Sean, I'm gonna have you look back at because you missed the first few things of notes, and so you didn't write down the place value chart. That's what you need in your notes today. So I'm gonna loan you my notes, and you're gonna write down because that's what you're missing. We had a place value chart that we wrote at the beginning of this lesson that you didn't write, and when you didn't get that, you didn't get the place value chart. That's what's messing you up here. You have to know, if you miss step 1, if you're not sure where the places are and you underline the wrong number, you may round correctly, but because you didn't have the right number underlined, you're going to get the wrong answer. So we're going to look at the 8. Look to the right, which is a 7. So now the 8 becomes a 9, and everything after disappears. So your final answer would just be 9. Now I want you to listen really carefully. This is my last thing I'm going to say before I let you start working. Boys on the couch, pay attention to what I'm about to say. Rounding decimals is no different than rounding whole numbers. Nothing has changed. The only thing that is a slightly bit different is the difference of the place values. So when they tell you to round to a place, it might not be 10,000ths place like you did in 3rd grade or 4th grade. Maybe it's the tenths with the TH instead. But even the rules didn't change. 4 or less, you give it a rest. 5 or more, you up the score. Those rules did not change. Those stayed exactly the same. The only difference is what you're looking at when you're underlining. So you're going to look at a different place value. That's the only difference. Please don't get confused. Everything else is the same. Okay, so when you start working on this assignment, what I was trying to tell you, because this says you're rounding to the ones place, your number should not go past the ones place, your final answer. See how my answer is just a ones? That's it. That was the other thing I was trying to tell you, is that's a good way to check that you've done the right thing. Look back to the directions. If it says round to the tenths place, then that means your number should not go past the tenths. Okay, that's a good double check.